Hello and welcome to the modeling of the Phantasm ball tutorial for CS281 Pipelines for Video Games. I'm currently using Maya 2015. Make sure you have the same version. If you have a different version, you may not find the same menus. So let's jump in. First of all, we want to make sure that we are working consistently in the same sizes and units as everyone else. So we want to check our settings. And you'll do so first of all by going to the drop down for Window, then going to Settings Preferences, and within that submenu going to Preferences. When you click on that, your options for preferences will come up. There's another way of bringing this window up, which is in the rightmost corner, lower rightmost corner in Maya. There's an icon of the red running man. Click on that and preferences come up as well. In the leftmost column here, click on Settings and make sure under Working Units you've got set from all these selections, choose Foot. And then choose, as long as you're here, NTSC 30 frames per second for the time. And press save. Make sure that your grid has not changed. If it has, you need to come into the second step, which is going up to the display menu, going to the options for the grid, and making sure that you've got these numbers for your grid display. Now that we're all working in feet, we want to make sure that the grid reflects that every single unit you see, every gray square, is a foot. And with these numbers, you now have a matrix of 10 by 10 on each of the four coordinates of the X, Y, Z. And you've also got grid lines every unit. So basically you have the assurance that each one of these little gray squares is 1 foot. Alright, the first thing we want to do is we want to come down here to create polygon primitives. Make sure that you are in polygons mode. I was in animation mode, which does still have create, but we're going to be starting to use later tools, and to utilize those we need to make sure that we're in the polygons mode in Maya. As you can see, mesh, edit mesh, and mesh tools display when I'm in polygons, and if it's left into any other mode in Maya, they disappear. So make sure you're in polygons and come up here to create polygon primitives, sphere. You also want to make sure that you've got interactive creation turned off. If you leave it on, which Maya has on by default, it will constantly harangue you to give it the measurements in width and height of any of the geometry you want. And sometimes you just want a bloody sphere. So turn that off so that next time you say select geometry, it simply pops in. Now I've got this sized correctly because I came in and manipulated it to be the correct size for this demo, but in case your sphere comes in at a smaller size, like so, or larger size and swallows the grid like so, we want to come in here to the channel box layer editor and manipulate the amount of polygons it's using to construct the sphere. And you do so by clicking on, in the channel box layer editor, its history. Now if you don't see this window in your right side of Maya, that's okay. You just have to come up here and make sure that of these four icons, only the rightmost one is depressed. So that you're looking at the channel box layer editor, and then you come over to Inputs. Click on Polysphere 1, and it should open up and show you all the history and the history of the object's construction. So in this case, we want to directly manipulate the history of this sphere so that it now we will all consistently have the same amount of polygons. And so in the radius, we want to type in 10. You'll see it shrink, and it should just kind of have the grid as it's skirting around the circumference. And then we type in 18 for the subdivisions in the axis, and 18 again for the subdivisions in the height. Now we are assured to have the same size as well as the same geometry of everybody else building this particular model. Now one of the things I find really helps when I'm constructing a model is that I can go between these modes up here. This is an icon for wireframe. This is the icon for smooth shading. And I like this one, which is wireframe on shaded. When I click it, you will not only see the shading, but you'll also see the wireframe of its construction. And that just sort of helps for now. So if you want to, you can click that on. It's a toggle button, so you turn it on, turn it off. Of course, it only affects that which you have selected. And let's jump in now to deleting half the faces. If you press your spacebar really quickly, you should go into 3 orthographic views. Down here you can see the name of the camera, side, front, and top. It's probably going to be easier seen when I select it, so you can see the geometry sort of showing you which way the cameras, these 4 different cameras, are oriented. The best way to do this is if you, again, quickly hit the spacebar, it goes into 4 views. If you bring your cursor down here into the side view or front view and quickly press the spacebar again, it will maximize that camera view. So you could quickly toggle between the views, just making sure that your cursor is in the view you want. Now sometimes things happen and people get several different camera views in different windows. You've got perspective over here and here and here. Things happen. Sometimes if you're just messing around really quickly, you can actually change the sizing of your windows and suddenly you don't know where you are. To sort this quickly out, go here on the leftmost side of Maya, as it has these sort of nested views that will allow you to reset your camera view to the default Maya 4 view or perspective view. I find it's best to just click on the 4 view and you can go right back to pressing the spacebar with impunity to maximize or minimize the window. So now we want to select the faces of this sphere. We're currently in object mode, and you can tell you're in object mode because you have this green selection of the entire object and there's nothing else being shown. However, when you depress the rightmost mouse button, you have a toggle menu which pops up for the duration that you're keeping the button down, and it allows you to drag over to your selections for the different components of that object. We're going to be popping between vertex and edge, and even up here you can reset back to object mode, which we'll be doing. But for the time being, we want to select all the upper half of the sphere's faces and delete them. So go down to face here on the bottom and just lift off once you've selected it. And now you can see you're in component mode. Component mode is shown by the light blue selections, meaning that you're no longer in a mode that selects the object as a whole, and if you move your mouse around the object, you can see that it's sort of popping a red selection square around the polygon that you will select if you at that moment hit your left mouse button. You will select it. Now, the other advantage to this mode is that you're allowed to draw a selection square, which is exactly what we want to do for just the upper half. And with the upper half of those polygons selected, here I am pressing F so I can frame what I have selected. The hotkey for frame all is A. The hotkey for frame what you have selected is F. And you can see it works in component mode as well as object mode. So with the other upper half selected, and I press the space bar to come up here and verify that, oh look, it did not select the other half here. That allows me, and this brings up a good point about, you think you've got everything going, but you're only checking it in one view. You need to be very careful about checking in all your views. And that's why kind of toggling between these different camera views is a really good way to work, so that you have certainty that you're grabbing everything you need to before you do an operation. So with the faces selected, I simply press the delete key and it will delete just those faces. I have some others to select now, which I can do in any of the different views, and press delete again. And finally I can come up here to the perspective view and grab these last bits and press delete. Now I'm kind of being I'm being a little dangerous in that I'm simply arbitrarily grabbing and deleting things, and it seems like there should be a way of assuring myself certainty of grabbing all of the polygons all the way through. Well, there is a way of doing that, and that way is that we need to manipulate the camera. In Maya, what you don't see is that if you bring up your window outliner, and this is a window that you need to make sure is always up because it kind of shows you your definitive laundry list of everything that you're currently dealing with in Maya, whether you see it or not. In this case, you have P sphere, which is the sphere we're currently manipulating, but you also have all four of the cameras that were introduced earlier when we were popping back and forth between the views. And these cameras are, you can see they're sort of grayed out because they're invisible. If you select each one, you can see that the visibility has been turned off for each of them. However, they do exist in the scenes, and what's happening in this particular case, the reason we can't see a grid here, and we can here, is the camera may be too close to the sphere. Now there's two different concerns here. One is that Maya is only going to draw so many things within its view camera, and the user dictates what that view camera is. So within each modeling window, as you see, there's a separate series of menus, and these menus are kind of the modeling window menus. So for the time being, let's just concentrate on the front camera. If you go up to View, select Camera, and then View again. By the way, what you've just done is select the camera from this particular view, so that's why this selection says Front. You've actually selected the front camera. Go then to View again and go to Camera Attribute Editor. If you click on that, you suddenly get pretty much the controls for that camera, and what we're going to be hunting down is this, the near and far clipping plane. This dictates the range of what that camera draws, and it simply may not have a long enough range to include the grid. So how I fix that is the near clipping plane, instead of being 0.003, is now 1, but the far clipping plane, instead of just being a mere 328, I'm going to throw it out to about 10,000, maybe 100,000. Suddenly we can see the grid because the camera's clipping plane now includes the grid. You can see how close this virtual camera is also to the sphere by making sure that the only thing on is the channel box layer editor, and then seeing that the camera is 328 units back in Z, which is effectively coming off the screen towards us. So if you were to pull that back just a bit more, let's give this the range of 500. We pulled the camera back even more because it's an orthographic camera. We didn't see anything change. But what this does allow us is the ability to grab faces, and suddenly we're grabbing all the way through, because now our camera includes basically the view of the camera shot out to include everything, not just the front, but also the back. And you can see that by having the grid as well. So this camera here is not really fixed, and it's only grabbing, as you see, half of the polygons, i.e. the ones that face us. This view, the side view, has everything, meaning that we have the grid in it because we've pushed back the camera's view. So now we're able to grab everything in the front and back. So that's a little exercise you can use quickly to go into, say, View, Select Camera, View, Camera Attribute Editor. Come in here and change it from 003 to 1, and then here I'll be a little more generous with 100,000. And suddenly we have the grid. In the top view, just to be absolutely consistent, I'll do the same thing. So there we are. So now we've got the grid displayed in pretty much every view, and you can see that it's also consistent. Although we're only drawing 10 units out, these sort of go on ad infinitum, but this sphere still occupies roughly the same space of 20 by 20 units. So let's now go in and cut these polygons here at the lip of this bowl in half. To do that, we're going to use a particular tool that is only available in the polygons mode, which if you come up to Edit Mesh, you can actually see it. I'm sorry, in Mesh Tools. And the Mesh Tools we're going to use is something called the Multi-Cut tool. Now this tool may not be available to some of you. If you come up here to, for those of you that do not have this tool available, you'll see this grayed out. It's available to me, it's in green, meaning it's loaded and ready to use. But some of you may see it in gray, meaning it's not available. And that means that Maya has yet to have it loaded, since this particular powerful tool is a plugin. So to make sure that you have that plugin working, go over here to Window, then down to Settings Preferences, then down to the Plugin Manager. Click on that, and this very long list of different plugins gets loaded. Maya has dozens and dozens of different plugins you can use, but to load all of these would actually take Maya quite some time just to get going. So usually what they do is turn all of them off and only select the ones you need. In this particular case, you're going to be looking for Modeling Toolkit and Modeling Toolkit STD. Modeling Toolkit's really the one you want. If I turn this off, you'll actually see this go gray, but take my word for it, you simply want it green, meaning it's available. So those of you that do not have it available, make sure you have that plugin loaded by clicking on Load and Auto Load, and then you should see it in green. So what the multi-cut tool does now that we have this object selected, and by the way, we've gone from face mode back to hold down the right key, back to object mode. And this means we're back to selecting the object as a whole. So when you kind of dodge between the two, where you're in component mode, you're grabbing edges, you're grabbing vertices, and you're grabbing faces, and you say, I'm done dealing with the components of this object, I'd like to now just grab the object. You can hold down the pop-up menu and go right to object mode. So with this selected, come over to Mesh Tools, the Multi-Cut tool. And when you bring that up, your icon should change, this strange little X-Acto knife. And what we're going to be doing is, if you kind of just trail your mouse along these edges, it tries to second guess where you're going to begin. And it allows you to click on an edge, then drag over, click on another edge, and continue until you're done. Then you press the Enter button, and it will accept that geometry. Now, you need to make sure you do this before you begin. Hold down the Shift key, because with the Shift key down, you now see the word Snap coming up, and that means that this is going to snap exactly in the middle of an edge. So you're assured a very clean bifurcation of the edge exactly at its midway point. Do not click over here. Make sure you go diligently one edge at a time. If you want to rotate your camera, that's fine. You can actually ease off the Shift key, go to your Alt key, and rotate the camera around. Go back to your Shift key and continue this journey of drawing a line exactly across the upper lip, the upper polygon ring that is the very top of this little salad bowl we've made. And what's great about this tool also is you don't need to be exactly on the edge. You can get pretty close to it, and as long as it kind of highlights in red, it means I'm dealing with this edge. You see I'm not exactly on the edge, but now that I've made this complete ring, I press Enter, and immediately I have basically cut these polys, so I now have 2 polygons where I had 1. So with this finished, let's indulge in our first bit of saving. Save scene as pball _1. I'm going to save this as _2. Now I did a little trick there, by the way. What I did is I said save scene as, and then I clicked on the name, and what it does is it reads that name in. And I don't want to write over that. So what I did was I came in here and simply changed 1 to 2, and it was easier for me to write this out. In case you have a very long, strange name, it saves you typing time. So with this new salad bowl saved, come in here and let's go to right-click component mode for faces, and let's click 2 of these polygons and avoid 1, 2, and then avoid 1. So you've got kind of a pattern of grabbing 2 and then skipping 1 all the way around the sphere. Now this is very important, and this is why we manipulated the geometry in the beginning to have a radius of 10 and polygons in both the horizontal and vertical coordinates at 18, so that it could exactly accommodate this little pattern of grabbing 2 and avoiding 1 all the way around. This also plays into the UV texture wrapping tutorial that I'll be doing. So you need to make positive that you follow this step so that it works. You should not have an extra ring of polygons left over. So with these polygons selected, you should just be able to hit the delete key on your keyboard and have them disappear. The next mode we're going to jump into is we're going to jump into the edge selection mode. And this is a neat little trick. Although this only selects one edge at a time when you drag your cursor around, Maya is smart enough to know that if you double click something, it should grab the entire periphery of this, even though you've got this kind of new rampart with merlons on it all the way around. So click on it very quickly, double click on it rather, and this slight sort of salmon coloring lets you know I've now selected the entire upper ring. If that did not work for you and you can't get it to work, it's still fine to just select things bit by bit, including these edges, by holding down the shift key and going around it, and try to be very careful about it. You can even press F to get in close to make sure that your colors validate that you've selected everything you need to. But this is currently working for me to just double click and we're ready to go. Now we're going to extrude this edge, but there's something very important about the extrusion process that you need to be careful to follow. And that is that when you extrude, Maya gives you an initial controller according to that object's normals. And what does that mean? Well, it means that I've got dozens and dozens of different edges here, all effectively facing, if you will, different directions. So it gives me a controller that says translate in direction A or direction B. It's only one controller because you certainly don't want to be flooded with a forest of them, but they are controlling each and every one of those polygons separately, meaning according to that edge's normals. So if I were to simply grab it and say extrude this edge, by the way, be very careful under Edit Mesh that you're using the extrusion under Edge, not the one under Vertex, nor the one under Face. We have edges selected. You want to extrude, and there's the controller I was talking about. But look what happens if I were to grab it and just start translating up. It starts going a little crazy. That's because it's trying to translate things according to all the different directions that these edges are facing, or the different coordinates in which they're going. So it's not really uniform. I don't want to use this controller in any way. We will later, but right now we don't want to. What we want to get is the average, the aggregate of all the distance of each one of these so that they respond uniformly. And to do that, we need to go over here to the scale tool and just click on it. Basically, you are still selecting all of these new polygons that you've made by the extrusion process, but we have one single controller right in the middle of the average of each of these edges distance from the center, which happens to now be the center. So if I grab this yellow manipulator and drag down, I'm dragging everything in ever so slightly by scaling it all uniformly. And that's what we're looking for, so make sure you use that process. If you have extruded once and then you forgot and then you kind of extrude again, be very careful. You've actually created double geometry. That can get very tricky. So be very careful about this process. You can't continually grab the same edge and then extrude, forget to do something with it, and then try to grab the same edge and then try to extrude. What you'll have then is dozens of points of geometry all sharing exactly the same space, and that can really mess Maya up. So I made sure that I had only one ringlet selected. I went to extrude process. With it selected, I didn't click off the screen anywhere. That's dangerous to do that. Keep it selected as I did. Simply come over here, use the scale tool, move it in about 1 unit, 1 unit being about that length. And so that's sort of equal. And then stop. You're good. Let's go back to object mode, click on it, and let's rename this. We want to rename it p-ball underscore bottom underscore mesh. And you can also see at this point all the different operations that are starting to pile up in its history. And we'll clean those up in a bit. For now, come over here, save scene as. It's just a nice way of getting into the habit of saving your geometry every few steps, because at some point Maya is going to let you down. It's going to crash. So with this selected, let's start to use these things called layers. The layers are very similar to Photoshop. They effectively let you put geometry into a null node that you can then turn on and off. And this is best done through demonstration. So make sure you're again in the channel box layer editor. Come down here to the layers options, and with this object selected in object mode, not in component mode, it won't work, but in object mode, click on layers and drop down to the second selection, which is create layer from selected. What's going to happen is it's going to create a layer and it's going to automatically put the geometry that's selected into it, which is just what we want. In fact, if we start bringing up the outliner, which we should have up under window, you can verify that that's currently the only geometry that's on the screen. And now that it's in this layer, we can click on the visibility of that layer here and it disappears. It still exists in the scene, we've simply made it invisible. We haven't changed the visibility of the object, we've simply made the entire layer and anything in it invisible. Next to it here, we have different options that allow you to have it displayed different ways. The first, if you click in that second box to the right of visibility, turns it to template form, which is kind of a permanent gray wireframe. The second is reference, R for reference, which shows it shaded, if you have it shaded, but makes it unselectable. Why would you want that? Well, in case you want to use this for some sort of measurement, but you're actually manipulating geometry inside of it, it's good to have this visible but unselectable. Of course, anything is selectable in the outliner window, so it doesn't apply. This is just for the modeling window. So for the time being, what I like people to do is just put this into the layer, validate it's in the layer by clicking on its visibility, and then let's move on. Under Create, let's go again to Polygon Primitives, bring in another sphere, and this time under its history, we want to manipulate it so that it has radius 9, not 10. And then the same 18, 18. So what we've done is we've created a sphere that we know fits snugly in the cradle of the bowl, because we've made sure that these have the same amount of polygons. These lines match perfectly. The vertical lines match perfectly, and we know it fits inside because we've made the radius 9 and the radius of this one was 10. So already we have an ability of making sure, perfectly sure, it is aligned to the sphere and we haven't done any eyeballing. Now in this case we're going to take this sphere and we're going to delete the lower part of it. So same practice, press your space bar, go back to one of the orthographic windows, and this time you want to come over here and click on the T for this bottom part of the p-ball. And why are we doing that? We're doing that so that you can see the exact line you need to select. So if I came in here and just said, yeah, okay, I'll delete all these faces, well, wait a minute, you're actually going to have some gaps now, because you can see that these, of the ramparts, the rampart top of the bottom has this sort of toothy gear edge that goes up and down. So you actually want these polygons in the top sphere to stay untouched. In fact, let's just make sure that we do not touch that entire ring. So we want to grab this ring instead. That's the one you want to press delete on. So now, in object mode, we can verify that when we turn this visibility on, there are no gaps. One fits snugly inside the other. Click on the mesh, click on the name, and let's name this P-ball top mesh. And let's come up here and just for certainty's sake, let's save it one more time. Okay, to move on, let's go in and grab just this top ring of faces on the top of the Phantasm ball. What you don't want to do is this. Again, it's perspective, so it's going all the way through. Frankly, it's sloppy too. Look at the faces I've inadvertently selected in the back. And if I were to translate these or rotate these or God forbid extrude these, I'd have a huge mess on my hands. So we want to be able to use, and I see people doing this, they just kind of stay in perspective view a lot. Ultimately this will hurt you. So what you want to do is maybe grab one face, press F, come up here, shift, select each of these. That's fine, as long as you double check your work. But there's an easier way of doing it. If you take any of these orthographic views and select the same single polygon, then press F, it'll do a close-up right in that area. And you can use your scroll wheel to get pretty up close and personal and select a very careful selection square around just that top part. Now when you press F, it's going to come in just on that selection ring. So with all of those faces selected, we're now going to indulge in a little bit of the extrusion of faces. We did so previously with edges with the Merlins. Now we want to come in here for faces and use extrude. Now, stop what you're doing. This is the same example of that default manipulation tool that I mentioned earlier. You think it's actually going up, but in fact, because there's the slightest angle for each of these polygons, that angularity is taken into account when the extrusion gives you this controller. So if I grab and drag up right now, like so, you're actually going to start getting this weird flange, this, you know, it's a kind of coronet, as opposed to a perfectly vertical shaft of polygons. Shut your mouth. So if you go to, well, which manipulator do we use then? If you go to the area where you've got all these different manipulators, we used scale previously, now we want to use move. Click on that. Do not click off anywhere here, it will deselect these faces. So if you click on the move tool, you now have a control that allows you to bring just those polygons up. And I'd like to have them dragged up about, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units up, roughly. Can we be exacting? Yes. If we hold down the X key and we make sure just to grab the arrowhead that's going straight up, we can actually snap these. And I'm currently snapping them so that they're about the level of that grid line. And with them selected now, I press delete. Alright, extrusions by default do not have any normal smoothing on them. What does that mean? Let's come over here and turn this wireframe on shaded off for a minute. And what you see is this kind of weird faceted tube coming up from a relatively smooth sphere. And that's to be expected. That's how normals are by default drawn during extrusion. They are not smoothed. So I'd like to smooth this new pipe and of course keep the smoothing here as well. By the way, that default hard edge actually helped us when we scaled in the toothy bits here, because we actually wanted a hard edge on all these. But it works against us when we want to have a smooth edge. Can we do it one of several different ways? Yes. I'll show you two. In object mode, grab the entire object, come over here then to normals, pop down to soften edge, and we'll soften the entire thing. And the problem is, of course, this little neck area, it's trying to resolve it as smooth, and it is anything but smooth. It's near to a 90-degree angle, and it's trying to resolve it using, you know, tricks of the light with normals. It didn't add any geometry to manipulate the normals, but there's no real way that you can ask this thing to reasonably take a right angle and resolve it and make it look smooth, because it's not a smooth transition. So instead we want to grab this ring using the edge selection tool, double click, and it should just select that neck ring, and it is this ring that we want to come up to normals, go down to harden edge, and that hardens that edge. And with that edge adequately hardened now, it's got a, you know, very hard obvious break from the sphere, it allows the rest of the smoothing to look perfectly acceptable. So with this selected now, let's come in here to a big step, which is delete all by type history. I promised you cleanup routine. This is it. And under Edit, Delete All by Type History, you should see all this bunch of history that we've given to not just one, but both of our objects. Both of them have accrued quite a lot of history in all of our manipulations. And this Delete All by Type, not Delete by Type, Delete All by Type. We want to do a clean sweep of this entire scene's history. So when I click on this button, you should see on the right all that history disappear. And it did. So now at this point, I want to save this scene. I want to make sure that my geometry has been named adequately. Good. And now let's move on to the next step. Okay, this next part is that we are going to effectively take everything that we've already built and put it into the P-ball layer. One thing I did not do yet is actually name this layer, so if you haven't already, let's do so. By double-clicking the name, layer 1, you should have a pop-up window. Let's come in here and just name it P-ball underscore layer. Now when I make this invisible, you can see that it still takes the bottom, but I now want it to include the top because I effectively want to wipe my modeling window free so I can build a new object. To include this object in that layer, select it, and then with your right mouse key, hover it over the word P-ball layer, click, and pop down to Add Selected Objects. And what you've done is you've added this geometry to this layer. You validate it by simply clicking on the visibility. And when it's clear and free, so are you to start building the Mario Brothers pipe. So for this exercise, we want to create a polygon cylinder. Just bring in a regular cylinder. And we want to come into the history and make sure we're all using the same size and poly count. So for this we need a radius of 2. We need a height of 10. We need a subdivision around the axis of 10. And you need a subdivision cap. This is a little trick we're going to be using. Subdivision caps 0. Now watch what happens to this little pie slice here when I say caps 0. Basically what Maya does is it makes the top and the bottom of the cylinder a single polygon. It's an illegal polygon, but it's okay because we're just going to be using this flat surface to extrude up and out to take this simple geometric stalk and make it into a plumbing pipe. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of take this bottom part and flatten it out, bring it up to 0, 0, 0, pop it up. To do that, we can go into any of the orthographic views, right click, grab now vertices, and we should have that entire ring selected. I'm going to go back into perspective and pop into wireframe to make sure that I have that entire ring. Of course, I'm just using the toggle keys of the numbers on my keyboard pad at the top, 4, 5, and 6 to go between 4 and 5, wireframe shaded. I can of course use these same icons as well. So with this all selected, I can go into the orthographic side view, click on the move tool. And by the way, these are the hotkeys. If you just rotate or hover your cursor over it, you can see that it not only gives a description of what that tool is, but it also gives you the hotkey. And it is basically W, E, and R. Q is of course the selection. So that's sort of a QWERTY Western typewriter, upper left hand corner set of buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the X, and yes, I can do this in perspective view as well because I live dangerously. Hold down the X because this will pop it onto the grid. I'm going to grab the arrowhead of this arrow, keeping it only in that axis. So when I click, I now snap it up to 0, 0, 0. How do I verify or validate? I go into the orthographic view. Could I have done it in this view as well? Absolutely. So you can use either of these views, whatever you're comfortable with, but you should get this effect that you've grabbed the vertexes from the bottom. Could we have done it with the face? Yes, we could have. This is an interesting sort of eccentricity of Maya. When it's in wireframe and you try to evoke the drop-down menu, it doesn't see it as a selected object until you're right on the wireframe. Then it gives you your modeling window, or your modeling options. In shaded mode, you're basically on that shaded surface at all times. So this is why you're going to see the drop-down menu when you're in shaded mode, and yet the very same space when you're in wireframe does not give it to you. Maya's funny that way. So in component mode, let's go here to face, grab the bottom face, just delete it. We don't want it. Grab the top face, and let's get ready to extrude. So come up now to Edit Mesh. We're going to be extruding faces and doing that little trick of don't use the existing controllers. Go instead to Scale. I'm just using the hotkey R, and make very sure you grab that middle controller to make sure you have a uniform scaling outward. Now, you're basically drawing one polygon right on top of another, but that's okay because we're going to continue extruding and separate them. Once again, come into Edit Mesh. Once again, go to Face Extrude, and now instead of the Scale tool, we're going to use the Move tool, and we're going to push things up. So now we're starting to make that little Mario tube. The last two steps are that you extrude yet again, and use the Scale tool now to bring things in. You're going to do a final drop down for the interior of the pipe, but as you know, what's very important is that we make the circumference of this circle smaller than this, and the best way to check that is to go into the top view and go to wireframe, press F, and make sure that your current selection is actually smaller than the existing stalk, outer stalk of the pipe's trunk. So now we want to do one last extrusion and push this down. And it is now pushed down. You want to make sure it snaps. X, grab just that arrowhead, and there you are. It's exactly flat on the grid. With that done, one of the bits of cleanup you can use is you grab the face and press delete. So now you should have a relatively nice looking little Mario Brothers pipe. Let's indulge now in the cleanup of making sure that this object is got its normals sorted out. In this case, I like to soften the edge of everything and then go in edge mode and shift double click. Sorry. Shift double click, shift double click. Same for this and that, and maybe at the end all the selections that are basically horizontal. There we go. And then with all those selected, go to normal edge, harden, and now every bit that should have a hard lip does, and the rest is relatively smooth. There's a little weirdness going in here. Let me see if I can't fix that. Hold on. Let's try to fix that. That looks like it's... There we are. That's sorted it out. I must have missed an edge, but I could tell there was kind of hinky shading on that one area. That looks pretty good. Okay, let's go in here and let's call this P-ball pipe underscore 1. And now we're going to affix this to the surface of the Phantasm ball. So let's open up your visibility of your existing layer, showing you the top and the bottom. Let's go into wireframe mode for now so you can sort of see it in the middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to raise this up, this pipe, so that the beginning of its stalk here sort of matches where the beginning of this neck is. And then we're going to rotate it so that it slides along the surface. But we want to be very careful about how we do this. So for this operation, let's make sure that we bring up the outliner as well. So there's our mesh, P-ball pipe 1. Great. Let's translate this up in positive 8.5. And those should be the same numbers that work for you guys because we're all using the same world and pretty much the same geometry. And it also gives you kind of a nice check to make sure that your pipe is not obscenely taller or bigger than mine. And at this point, I would like people to now group just the pipe. You can see that in my outliner, I just have the pipe selected. So under Edit, drop down to Group. Okay, now I have a group whose pivot point is at 0, 0, 0. If yours is not, because you have the settings for your group a little different, you may want to come in here to Group, go to the options for it, and make sure you have the same options as I do. Where you have grouping under Parent, your group pivot is at the origin, and you preserve the position. Or you could simply move the pivot point of the group down to 0, 0, 0. That's fine too. Use Grid Snap. So with this selected, and I can go into shaded mode for this, I'm going to rotate this group 45 degrees. And when I do, I know it's going to have perfect contact along the surface because the pivot point is the same pivot point as this sphere. So it's now running along the surface of it pretty cleanly. There's a little bit of interpenetration, but that's okay. It's pretty clean. So I want to create 2 more of these and have them on equidistant parts of the sphere, equidistant from this one. To do that, I'm going to duplicate this group. So again, here's an operation you need to be careful on. Make sure what you have selected is the group, not the mesh. With the group selected, come up here to duplicate. You have a new group. Wonderful. Rotate in Y. Let's do this 120. With that same group selected, we can do this again. Duplicate. And instead of 120, we want to type in 240. There we go. I think shading should show this a little better. So what I've done is I've used the rotation of the group to put things where they should be. If I wanted to eyeball this, I'd have my work cut out for me because I could make it look good, but I simply wouldn't have the numerical accuracy that I'm getting by grouping it and letting the geometry and letting the math do the work for me. So in this case, you've got 3 groups, 3 equidistant pipes, and also one of the advantages is that Maya has created some has created the exact same geometry. So as long as we make sure our initial mesh is perfectly clean with all the normals, it will do the same with these copies. So make sure that your initial prototype, as it were, of the pipe is very clean. Now we want to free this geometry up. We have a lot of groups starting to accumulate here. We want to free this geometry up from its groups. The problem is that if we delete these groups outright, we might delete the mesh, or we would just have this, or some of this geometry will pop back in place. So we want to come up here and effectively delete all history again. You see there was a lot of history down here, and we want to unparent this geometry, not ungroup, but unparent it from its group. And you do that by coming up here to the Edit menu and going down to Unparent. Boom. This mesh stays exactly where it should, but it's now free from this empty group, which you can delete. There's another way of doing this, which is you can grab all the geometry. This, of course, is in a reference layer, so it's not going to grab it. But you can grab all the geometry here in the modeling window, not in the outliner. If you grab models in the modeling window, it will grab just the models, not the groups. So with all of those in one fell swoop, you can unparent them all, and they are now all free of their groups, allowing you to come in here and just delete groups 2 and 3. What Maya's done also, since we ungrouped it, it can't have 3 different meshes all named p-ball pipe underscore 1. They were named p-ball pipe underscore 1 when they all had separate groups, but now they're at the peer level. Maya automatically renamed them 2 and 3. kind of what we want. So at this point, we want to grab these new pipes, add them to your layer, get rid of the visibility, and save this scene one more time. Okay, time to start the third phase. We want to bring in yet another cylinder. And let me give you the vital statistics on this one. This particular cylinder is going to be radius 2, height is 3, and the subdivisions are going to be 12. And do not use the caps trick in this one. I know if you turn it to 0, it'll get rid of all that those little weird asterisk spider webbing. We want that to stay in place, so make sure the subdivision caps are at 1. We will be using them. We want to turn this on its side. I'm going to use the rotate X. You could use rotate Y. Doesn't really matter. I want to delete one side of the faces. And to do that, I can grab them all one at a time using the shift click. Or I can come in here, grab the whole of them, shift unselect what I don't want, and then use wireframe to determine that I have just the faces on one side of this little drum selected, and press delete. You cannot delete edges, you cannot delete vertices, you can only delete faces. Make sure you're in face mode. Now I want to make sure that these vertices here snap at the axis here at 0, 0, 0. So I'm going to go into my orthographic view, hold down the X key for grid snap, grab just the arrowhead in the direction that I want, and move it until, boom, it snaps at 0, 0, 0. Because this side, these faces here, I'm going to start drawing a doorknob by extrusions. So these set of faces, the remaining ones, I'm going to use my little trick of selecting everything and unselecting what I don't want, validating I have just that sort of wagon wheel series of faces selected. I'm going to come up here to edit mesh and extrude again. We are going to extract them. We're going to we're going to scale them. Now what I did was not extrude another series of polygons, I just changed my manipulator. And you're allowed to do that. So by the way, if I've scaled them down, but if I immediately then started pulling them out, it would grab, I have not done a new extrusion. So to create a little divot in this doorknob, I want to come over to edit mesh, continue the extrusion, extrude yet again, and I'm really extruding at every point along this operation so that my extrusion kind of matches the previous size that I had. This is me just kind of eyeballing it. That's okay. And I want to extrude again. And I'm just using the hotkeys for these controls. And I want to extrude again, and this is going to be a combination of extrusion out first, and then I'm going to pop immediately to the scale tool and scale it down, creating this kind of strange little doorknob. I'm going to push it in again. This bevel, as it were. And that's a combination of both extrusion and scaling, translation after the extrusion and then scaling. And I'm going to do it one more time. Only this time I'm actually going to push it in just a bit, like so. So now we got that cool little doorknob look. And we are going to indulge in some booleans at this point. So create a polygon primitive cube, drag it out where you can see it. This cube is a very odd shape. This is no cube, this is a Lego brick. So I'm going to come into polycube, width is 2. Ah, sir, you are no brick. And it looked wonky like that because the polygon primitives cube, if you go into the options, these have been changed. If I reset them, they'll go back to 111. There you go. So close this, object mode, and let's come in to change the scaling on certain on the dimensions, so we can take this cube and make it more like the prongs of an electrical cord. And to do that, we want to take the scaling of, let's see if it's X that I want it in. Yes, it is. You may be Z depending on which way you initially rotated this can. But I pretty much have the dimensions I'm looking for as far as the overall thickness. And in Y, let's try 1.5. That may be a bit much, but maybe not. Will that fit exactly in? Again, I'm not going to use perspective. Perspective lies. I want to come into orthographic view. Yeah, that fits nicely. Wonderful. And to make sure I have perfect parallel series of these, I want to translate in X to 0.5. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to translate that to positive 5. Now I've got one exactly on either side. Now is that going to fit? And it is. Okay, wonderful. Can verify that it's going in. Wonderful. So here's the point of this doorknob exercise, as it were. We're going to take these two cubes and just push them and interpenetrate the geometry, because we're going to be using the Boolean operation to and take these cubes to dig out that same space. These two similar looking bits of geometry will be digging out holes in the doorknob, so that you have what effectively looks like an electrical outlet from the doorknob handle. Very dangerous thing to have in your house. So the operation for Booleans is best done when you don't have a lot of history. So let's come up here and delete all history again. And you want to select the doorknob first and shift select the geometry of one of the first cubes you want to dig out. So the selection order for Maya is select that which you are digging from, i.e. the dirt, and then select what is doing the digging, i.e. the shovel. So with that operation, and you can see that this soon-to-be prong is green, means that's the last thing that was selected. Come up here to Mesh, Booleans, Difference, but hold. Go to the options first. We have one last detail. Make sure that in the options for the difference of Booleans, you have things set to edge. Edge displays actually the geometry that'll be cut out, that'll be dug out on the inside. The default setting is that it just creates a hole. So make sure you're on edge mode and apply. So now you see that it's dug out a hole, but more importantly, it has the interior geometry of that hole. And you do the same operation for the second one. And now we have a doorknob electrical outlet. Wonderful. So we need to resolve some issues here, which is that the Boolean operation has created dozens of little tiny vertices here. An example here is that it's done a pretty good job digging things out, but it has not optimized these vertices. So really now what we're dealing with is we've got a lot of extra geometry that Maya is going to create, because it's got to resolve all these faces into quads and triangles. But we can beat Maya at its own game by simply taking each of these oddly shorn polygons and moving them vertex by vertex using vertex snap. So I'm going to grab one vertex and then hold down the V key, and I'm going to pop it to an existing corner, like so. There we are. I'm going to grab the next vertex, move it over there as well. And I'm going to try and I'm going to go through each of these vertexes and resolve them so that we just have a series of triangles drawing the same image without doing anything new or superfluous. to the geometry. So what I'm doing now is I'm just snapping all the geometry to its nearest corner. And that's going to help me when I finally do my merge of all these little vertices. They will be welded onto each other, and it will keep the surface clean. So I don't have all this strange double and triple vertices in the geometry that necessitate a lot more faces being drawn than we actually care to have. Now it's briefly changing the surface look because it's popping to other vertices that I don't need it to pop to. But when I get near the vertex that I want, it behaves just fine. In fact, this is an operation that arguably is best done if you're in kind of vacillating between wireframe and hard shaded. And everyone's vertices should be fairly similar to the ones I have here. I don't think there's a lot of difference between, there should not be a lot of difference between the operations, between our geometries, because we were really careful about making sure that we had the same amount of geometry, the same size, the same polygon count. Whoops, what are we doing here? Oh, I see, it kind of popped back. What are we doing? Ah, see, this is part of snapping things. It looked just fine until I realized Maya was messing with me. So I'm going to do an undo until I'm back in the saddle again with my controls. Okay. This looks fairly well resolved. So what I have now is a very... Isn't that funny how Maya does that? It popped on a very distant point, but it looked like it was still on. Maya, you so crazy. So we have a series of geometric faces, just for consistency. And the vertices are resting quite literally on top of each other, and we need to resolve those by going into object selection mode, and you want to come up to edit mesh, merge components, and the options allow me to see the proximity with which vertexes and faces and edges can be next to each other before it welds them, and that's a pretty good close number, 0.03. Because I have these vertexes all pretty much occupying the same space, and that means they should have even lower number than that. So if I now hit apply, I have poly merge over here, and when I select a singular vertex, it's only got one vertex, not dozens and dozens. So the next operation we want to indulge in is smoothing out these normals. And that's best done by our little routine of softening everything. Okay, so I want to grab the edges that I want to keep, that I want to show their harsh change from one direction to the next. I can use the hardening of the normals. And this particular object has more than just your usual set of rings, including this interface of the doorknob, is that these Boolean shapes, all those edges are ones we're going to want to grab. So I'm just going to grab those one at a time, or I can go into wireframe mode and sort of grab them, attempt to grab them in one fell swoop, but I have to be careful not to grab the exterior, the ones that constitute the exterior face, because that will start that will sort of expose the fact that they are constructing a face that's supposed to be flat, and you'll start seeing all kinds of breakage in the face, in the flat face of this doorknob fact, I've inadvertently grabbed one right there. So what I'm trying to do is grab all these interior space edges. It's a little tricky. I should probably get a little closer, but live dangerously. So I've grabbed all these edges, and in shaded mode I want to have these now hardened and looks wonderful. So this face that I was talking about, if I had inadvertently grabbed any of these edges and hardened them, you'd see that weird breaking. Those must remain flush. They must remain smooth. The interior also is pretty visible because of all the hard edges of the normals in there. And the doorknob looks pretty good. So with the doorknob selected, you may want to save again. And I'm going to utilize a method to create its doppelganger. I want to create a copy. Now I could duplicate it like so, just using the hotkey of Command D, and then flip it around by typing in the rotation in Y, and then moving it over until I'm sure that these two match up exactly. I could do that, and there's certainly nothing wrong about it, but I want to utilize something that allows us to mirror the geometry. And the mirroring geometry is under Mesh, and what mirror geometry does, I'm going to bring up the options for it, is that it actually creates a mirror of the selected object, as per the name, and will automatically merge the vertices with the original object if you so desire. So it looks to me like this is in the negative x, positive x, I believe. I'll do one test here. Apply. Nope, that did not work. It's actually in the z, and that's sort of like two Apollo moon units kissing. Try it that way. That's the wrong axis. We're getting closer. There we are. It was negative z in this particular instance. And now this is one piece of geometry. To get rid of this middle bit, this middle ring, I can grab the whole of it, of its vertices, and then simply snap them over to the nearest ring. I can do so by holding down V, since I have absolutely no assurance that this is on the grid. I want to use V, not grid snap. And once I get to the edge, it simply snaps as a whole ring to those. And then I can come up to the edit, or to mesh, and merge, edit mesh, and merge components. And now I've merged the polygons again. And it's even left these alone because, again, 0.03 is a pretty tiny threshold. So now I have this doorknob, and I'm going to come into the name and name it. And I'm going to delete its geometry history, and I'm going to add it to the layer. But before I add it, I want to put it in the right position. So in this case, I want to raise it up and place it right on top of the neck stalk that we made. Now because we added these, because we used the mirror geometry, we don't really have the pivot point in the center of this object. To kind of resort it out, go under Modify, Center Pivot, and it should reach that always takes the average space of all the mass of your object and places the pivot point right there. So I want to slightly increase the scale of this so that I can accommodate the neck of this, and I'm going to try and use these numbers. So I'm going to use 1.5 and 1.5 and then 1.1. Does that work? It does. Again, you may have rotated your object in a different direction than mine, so these numbers remain the same, just switched around until you don't want an oval, you don't want to squash this. I just had it basically at 1.5 all around, and I just scaled it in on the Z axis to 1.1, so it was a little more squashed just in this axis. So that's where this should rise to, and it is something that you want to more or less eyeball so that it's at the very top, and there's the slightest bit of interpenetration because you want it to go into the object, sort of like it's holding it. And then you add it to the layer, and let's save this one more time, certainly not the last time, and move to the final lightning round of the Phantasm ball modeling, which is creating a lightning rod. So under polygon primitives, again, read in one more cylinder, and the radius is going to be 1.5. The height is going to be 8. Subdivisions, and this is important because we're going to be doing subdivisions on both subdivision axis and height. Subdivision axis should be 10, and the subdivision height should be 7. So there we are. Do not use the caps trick of 0. Keep the caps. We're going to use those. So getting in close and personal on this, I want to have everyone grab the faces on the bottom. And I'm doing the old select unselect trick. Make sure it's there, and I delete. But what we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to grab the ringlets, the odd numbered ringlets of the polygons of this cylinder, like so. There will be 3 sets. Here's the first, the second, and the third. So what I have is a buffer of unselected polygon rings at the top and bottom. It's probably a little more obvious in the perspective mode. And we're going to indulge in something that we have not done thus far, which is we're going to use the default extrusion tools. Remember, every time we've done extrude thus far, we do not use the controls that Maya by default gives us because they align things according to each of the selected objects or selected components' normal orientation. But in this particular case, we want that, and I want to show you why first. So we extrude, and here's the default control Maya gives us. Again, be very careful. It looks like it's coming off of this polygon. It's not. By rotating around, I verify that it's coming off of this polygon. And it's very important because you need to identify which way is out from that one control. Why? Because when we move it, it will move each and every one of these selected polygons in a relative fashion, not an absolute fashion, which is what we've been doing thus far. So if I grab the tip of this arrow, this blue arrow, and push it in, watch what happens. All of them get pushed in according to their normal. And so I've quickly made a nice little lightning rod. So for cleanup purposes, we want to come in here to vertex, grab the vertex, raise it a bit to give it a nice capped top. We want to come in here also and make sure that we've got smoothing in all the right places. So I'm going to use my old trick, of course, going in and softening each and every one of the edges, and then I go through and select all the edges that that needs hardening. And this will be a selection of all the exterior as well as interior rings. There are some automated processes that allow you to do this, but I frankly am very much a fan of doing your work manually, especially when you're learning the software, because tools come and go, but ultimately if you know what you're doing, you can always build whatever object you want with just 4 or 5 basic tool sets. Alright, and with those selected, harden edge, and now you've got pretty good looking lightning rod. And you want to come in here and rename it to P-ball lightning rod underscore mesh. And we can make everything else visible. And what I would like people to do now is have this rotated along the head of the doorknob. And there'll be two of them that look like antenna. So to do this, what you want to do is you want to determine the center of things. Well, we determined the center of this sphere because we knew that it started, that the center of this sphere was 0, 0, 0. In this case, we do not know, nor do we have any coordinate system to let us know what is the center of this doorknob. I'm going to take it off of reference because we actually need to see the middle of the doorknob. Well, we do have the pivot point, which is pretty cool, but how do we align something to a pivot point? Well, there's an easier way of doing it, which is that we sink this slightly into the top head of the doorknob, sink it ever so slightly. You know, you don't want to have a gap of it kind of floating out here. Sink it in just enough that it takes the entirety of the base. And then we go to manipulate the pivot point itself. But before we do this, make sure you're in the proper view. By the way, look what I've just done. I've created two perspective windows. Yikes! Still happens to even Professor. So we click on what I mentioned earlier, and lo and behold, we are reset for our 4 views. So in this case, we want to turn on the wireframe on shaded, because what's important is this point right here. I'm going to take the pivot point of the lightning rod, and I'm going to use vertex snap, but I'm not snapping it to any vertex here. I'm going to snap it to the vertex right here. And that's going to be my rotation point because I know that's the middle of the doorknob. So I'm going to hold down D and V, and I'm not going to grab that middle yellow circle. I'm going to grab this top yellow line that looks like one of the edges, and I'm going to sink this down until boom, I'm right there in the center, and it's snapped to it. So I know it's right in the center, and I'm allowed the luxury of just rotating this, seeing what it's manipulated and rotate. I'm rotating it in Z, so I can type in 45. I'm then going to duplicate this, and the second lightning rod I'm going to put at -45. And now I have a finished Phantasm ball. And I can even add these at the very end of the layer. Bring them all up. Delete the you may want to save a version with history, but the last version that I saved definitely does not have history on it, because I want nothing but meshes here, no empty groups, nothing like that. And so I save scene as P-ball 8, and that's my latest version. And that's the modeling for the Phantasm ball.